you do, if you want to keep your cameras off during the recording, that's fine. But thank you so much for joining us. Just wanted to take a minute to introduce us all to you before we get going. My name is Jess Goldberg. I'm the Director of Business Development and Community Engagement for Early Autism Services. I am also the proud mother of two amazing young teenagers, both who have special needs. And so I am very familiar with the IEP process. So excited to be participating in our discussion tonight because I really wish I had someone like Heather Wright in my corner 15 years ago when I started navigating. Also with us tonight is Graham Green. She is the clinical director for our services here in Atlanta. And of course, our amazing presenter is Heather Wright. She is a special education consultant and master IEP coach. So before we kind of get into our discussion about the IEP process, I did want to just take a second and introduce you to Early Autism Services. We are an ABA provider. We've been in this business for about a little over 15 years. We have over 800 clinicians on our team. We are in over 20 locations in the US, India, and Australia. We are truly early intervention specialists. We provide services for children who are 2 to 10. All of our therapy programs are personalized based on each child's individual needs and goals. And we're going to be focusing on functional communication, behavior planning, self-help skills, social skills, and school readiness. So in all of our branches, we have center-based ABA available. And so often many of our clients will join our services as they're transitioning out of their state early intervention program before they go into the services provided by schools. In our therapy centers, we're really able to still create that one-on-one individual therapy program, but we could still expose our clients to preschool-like activities, programs, transitions, and just build those prerequisite skills to get our clients ready to transition into schools. So that's just a little bit about us at Early Autism Services. And I am super excited. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Heather can share hers. And I'm very, very excited to spend some time with you all and our presenter tonight, Heather Wright. Heather, I think you might be muted.
I was muted. Yes, I lost my screen sharing ability, or my screen didn't pop up that gave me my complete access to all of y'all, so I couldn't see it.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, I had a feeling, and I should have mentioned, I'm sorry that to everybody, we're going to keep things super informal tonight. So this is really time for us to, just wanted to, no worries, Heather, about that, because I'm sure we're going to have.
You should think that I would know this as a former educator, I was teaching through COVID and having to present and all the things, and now I'm using the same excuse that I hated. I can't get my technology to work. Jeez. Anyway, so yes, good evening, everybody. And I just wanted to share that I am Heather Wright. And I'm a certified special education teacher. I live in the state of Georgia. I think we have maybe 1 or 2 people from Georgia here tonight. And I think the rest of us are from out of state somewhere. And that's amazing. So thank you for joining us. I did want to just say and put it out there that I'm not a lawyer. I don't practice law. Just putting it out there. If you need legal advice, please go to somebody else. I can refer you, if you're in the state of Georgia, to a couple of lawyers. but all of the decisions that I help parents make are their own. So yes, this is kind of, I want it to be formal, but I wanted to gear it to you all. So if there's a question that you have, please type it in the chat. If there's a time that maybe there's a pause in me talking and you want to unmute your mic and ask the question out loud, please do so. But I do want to make sure that we're kind of keeping things confidential. So if you could keep your student's name, maybe the school district. I don't want you to say those types of things in those questions. And please just let's answer and make sure that you guys are getting everything that you need from this presentation. So I did want to share a little bit about who I am. I help parents understand the process of special education and help get the services and supports they are required for their child to be successful in the public school system through collaboration. The biggest thing that I want to say there is collaboration. It takes a village of people to help and make sure that they're supporting your children. So I try to really be collaborative. As a former special education teacher, I sat on the other side of the table. So I know the ins and outs of what the school system looks like, and I help try to put things together. I see what the parents want, see what the district wants, and kind of bridge that gap. Like I said, I was a middle school special ed teacher for 16 out of the, actually I guess 15 out of the 17 years that I was a teacher. I taught 5th grade for a little bit. I was an instructional support teacher. If you're in Georgia, that's like over special ed and at school systems. The biggest probably accomplishment that's on that list is that I was teacher of the year in 2019. So I do know what I'm talking about most of the time. And it was a huge accomplishment in that case. I do have a master's degree in behavior disorders and learning disabilities, and I love that aspect of special education. Recently, I did publish a book on Amazon. It's a planner. I won't cross promote it or anything like that, but it is out there if you want to go check it out. It's on Amazon, and it's called the Yearly IEP Planner, a Parent's Guide. I am originally from Pittsburgh, so if anybody is from the Pittsburgh area or Pennsylvania, woohoo. I live in Georgia, but I do support families nationwide. And I think even Jess asked me that. She was like, how do you support families all over the country? And I said, well, there's this thing called IDEA law. And law is federal. And yes, different states do things differently, but I can support nationally. I am married. I have 2 dogs, and I love all things about baking and being by the water and spending time with my niece. And I just have to say, I'm super passionate about special education. And Jess mentioned that she has children with special needs. I do not. My background is truly being an educator in the special education world. And when I got into college, special education picked me. I walked into my first college class, and they said, you need to do special ed. And I was kind of apprehensive about it because I didn't have much knowledge. And I walked into my first class and I walked out of there going, I'm teaching special education. And I didn't look back, taught special ed forever. So I have a question for you guys. And if you could put it in the chat on a scale of 1 to 5, and look, Jess, I fixed my presentation here. I had 1 to 10. How would you rate your understanding of the special education process? 1, not at all. You're very new. You don't know anything about it. Or 5, you could write a book. If you could put that in the chat. I'd just love to see where our participants are today. Diana, you got a 1. That's good. That's okay. I'm glad you're here. Don't be shy. I don't think I'm a 5. I'll be honest. Oh, Reed, Heather's a 3-ish. Okay, 2. I love it. I'm glad that you guys are all here, and hopefully after the presentation, oh, Jess is a 4. She's been through the process. Yeah, hopefully after this presentation, you'll get some information, and maybe your 1s will be 2s, maybe your 2s will be 3s, or maybe you're still like, oh my gosh, Heather, you've left me with more questions than answers. Well, that's why I do free consults, and we can talk about how I can support you, or you're going, what the heck? I need more help with the team. I didn't know that I could ask for this. How about this? So yeah, I don't think I'm a 5. I'd probably say probably a 4. Somebody asked me to write a book, and I was like, I'm not an author. So no, I'm not. So let's just start with, and you guys can see the screen, right? Yes, Jess, you can see the screen. So I always like to just start off with what special education is. And if you heard me say IDEA law, that is the governing federal guidelines that support special education. And irony, special education law is only 50 years old. It only came into existence in what, 1974, if that's 50 years ago. It's very new. We've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And what that means is special education is specially designed instruction. So that's instruction. You're changing the instruction that children are getting when they're in special education to meet the unique needs of a child. It can be done in a classroom. It can be done at home. It can be done in hospitals. It can be done in institutions. It can be done in therapy groups and sessions. Like, you can provide special education anywhere. And the biggest thing that you need to know is that last line on my slide. Special education is a service. It's not a location. So your child is in a classroom receiving special education services. Your child is not in a special ed classroom. They're receiving special ed services in a certain location. They're in an art class receiving specialized instruction in that art class. So they're not the same thing. It's a service, not a location. And parents and families get like, what do you mean? It's the service. It's the specially designed instruction by a service provider, whether that's a special education teacher, that could be a related service provider in the school system. So OT, PT, speech and language. If you are going and transitioning into a public school, and I'm just briefly saying this, most public schools do not allow ABA therapists, BCBAs, RBTs from private services into schools. Just keep in mind with that. Not that you can't do that after school and privately, but they don't typically allow your private therapist like that to come into the school setting. All right. So early intervention to special education. So I was talking to Jess about this the other day, and I really wanted to break it up into how you get to special education and what special education looks like in terms of IEP. So any child that is looking for services with special education or through an IEP needs to go through what is called a comprehensive evaluation. So any child, the ages of 3 to 5, have to receive that comprehensive evaluation, and that can be done through the school system at no charge and no cost to you. You do not have to get a private psychological evaluation in order to qualify for services. If you do that, you can bring it to the school system, but keep in mind, the school system only has to consider that evaluation report. They don't have to take it and just implement it and give you services. Similarly, if you go to a doctor and the doctor diagnoses your child with autism, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get an IEP in the education system or in the school setting. There's education model versus medical model. So we have to look at, does your child meet the criteria under one of the 13 eligibility criteria? And I'm pointing over here, my presentation's on the left of my screen. But once they're found eligible, 3 years, they're eligible for services for 3 years. It's called a triannual. Not saying that at 3 years their eligibility goes away. The team, the IEP team, so that's you as the parents, that's the school team, as in a general ed teacher, a special education teacher. If it's in preschool, then it would be a preschool special education teacher as well. It could be a general ed teacher. You look at the criteria and say, does this child still require specialized instruction? Do they still meet the criteria for services? If the answer is yes, then they could move on with eligibility without doing testing. Sometimes it does require testing. And specifically, if your child is found eligible for developmental delay, in Georgia, we call it significant developmental delay, that eligibility is only good until the age of 9 in most states. So developmental delay is like an overarching like umbrella that fits if your children or a child is delayed and doesn't necessarily fit one of the other categories yet. So if your child is eligible under that category, they will have to have a different eligibility by the time they're 9 years old. in order to remain eligible for services. So keep in mind, ask questions early on at those eligibility meetings of what you're looking for, what eligibility criteria we're looking at. So if the team decides, yes, you're eligible. So I was at a meeting with a client last week that is doing ABA therapy 5 days a week. Well, they're transitioning to kindergarten next year, and they were like, we need support. He can't just go to kindergarten without having anything. So they did the referral through, in Georgia, what it's called is Babies Can't Wait. And then they went through early intervention, and then they direct referred their child and said, I need my child referred, or I need a meeting and diagnosis for eligibility for special education. So we went through all the testing, was found eligible for him. He was found eligible under autism. And then we developed the IEP. So if the team gets to a meeting and looks at the evaluation data, looks at behavioral data, academic data, as much as possible that they can at that point. Sometimes it is through observation. It doesn't necessarily need to be standardized assessments. They say yes, meets eligibility criteria, then we move on. Their child is then eligible for special education and then can receive an IEP. So an IEP supports children from the ages of 3 until their 22nd birthday or the day before they're 22. Like I said, and Jess was mentioning this, services can provide in a preschool setting, childcare setting, Head Start programs, if the IEP team agrees to it, that it's appropriate. It does not have to be served. Excuse me. The services from the IEP do not have to be strictly delivered inside a public school setting. Let me make sure that you hear that. Services don't necessarily need to be served in a public school setting. The speech therapist can come to your program or wherever you're at and provide speech services. Doesn't just have to happen in the school setting. Your IEP, once you get an IEP or your child gets an IEP, does have to be reviewed annually. So every year it has to be done, but that doesn't mean that you can't call a meeting a second time or a third time if there are reviews that you want to change in the IEP. You're concerned about progress on goals and objectives. And then the biggest thing that I think is super important for families to know is parent input statements. And we'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. But I also do suggest that whether you get to an eligibility meeting, you've requested it from the school team, you've maybe already been found eligible, your child, not you, your child has been found eligible for services, you have a right to have all of the documents that the school team has. You don't have to come to that table and be surprised. I don't like surprises. I'm not like one for like surprise birthday parties. Don't do it to me. Don't blindside me at a table. There's a lot of information in those eligibility reports, in those IEP meetings, just in general. There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of acronyms. You have the right to request those documents sent to you before the meeting. And when I say before, not the night before. If you get them the night before, you can request that that meeting is postponed because you have not had meaningful input. I suggest at least 3 days. Some of the states across the nation require it to be at least 3 days before. In the state of Georgia, there's no requirement. I tell my clients, make sure you request it in writing 3 days before. Draft eligibility reports, draft psychological reports, speech evaluations, OT evaluations, draft IEPs, progress reports, raw data samples. You can get all of that before the meeting, and you should. I'm going to stop right there for a second. Does anybody have questions about anything that I just said? You can either unmute or you can type it in the chat. I just don't want to keep going on because I feel like I talk a lot sometimes.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, my name is Diana. I do have a question. So what you're saying is if it's the first time we're requesting an IEP from the school,
Mhm.
we do have the right to ask for those documents 3 days before, even if there's no data available yet, as far as my child is concerned, or did I misunderstood you in that aspect?
So if you have requested an eligibility or eligibility for your child, so you requested that, you did have, can I ask some other questions that I'll keep your child, I don't know your child's name, but
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
has your child been found eligible for special education yet?
So that is the hiccup that I've been trying to do. And I don't want to take everyone's time, but a quick summary is I've been requesting the IEP, but the school has been like pushing it away, saying like academically he's fine. And, you know, they were telling me that they needed more data in order for me to request that information. And so finally I got back from the psychologist, the final format of his diagnosis of the autism. And so I did request the meeting to happen, or they gave me an appointment for this Friday. And so technically I'm still like in limbo. Does he qualify? Does he not qualify for that?
Okay. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that, because that gives me a little insight. So even if it's your child's first IEP, there still might be a draft that is going to be available to you to review. Even the eligibility report, you should still be able to get that prior to your meeting on, I think you said Friday. You can request that information gets sent to you on Friday. Now, some schools, and I will say personally, I don't like to do eligibility meetings and IEP meetings in the same meeting, because eligibility goes over a lot of the testing information. It gets to be a lot. And then if you're doing the IEP on top of that, you could be sitting there, like the meeting I had the other day with a family, we were there for 3 hours. That's a long time to be getting information from all the different providers. So you don't have to have both meetings at the same time, because legally they can't predetermine that your child is going to qualify for special education. That's the purpose of the eligibility meeting. So they might not have the IEP available to you, but they should have the draft eligibility, the psychological, all the testing that they've done, and even the data that they took on your child. They should be able to send that to you as well.
You got it. Okay, I'm going to make sure I request that then.
Yes. And thank you for bringing up the data point, and that they're saying to you, it's not IEPs and special education is not just for academics. So yes, that's part of it. There needs to be an educational impact, but it could be behaviorally impacting their school setting. It doesn't mean, like, I've had kids that qualified for special education and they were sitting with all A's and B's because it wasn't impacting necessarily math and science. It was affecting their social emotional well-being and that of others. IDEA law also says, again, I'm not a lawyer, but I know what the laws say, and this might not go for necessarily you at the pre-K level yet. You do not have to wait until data is taken in order to start the evaluation process. RTI data, so response to intervention data, can be taken simultaneously while a child is in the process for eligibility. So if the school district tells you that they have to wait for data to be collected, now there has to be some data taken, but they can do it together. So you can have some data taken, interventions, and the eligibility testing at the same time. If they're telling you that that's not allowable, I need you to write this down, everybody. Knock, knock, knock. Ask them for the policy. Where's the policy? Can you please provide me the policy about data collection and it needing to wait until we're done in order to start the evaluation process? There's no policy on that because IDA law says that you don't have to wait for it. And then you just have grounds for that, and make sure everything gets put in writing as well. Can y'all write that down? Where's the policy? I was at a training a couple weeks ago and they were like, we're getting shirts made. Show me the policy. I was like, I love it. Show me the policy, show me the data instead of show me the money. I'm showing my age because I love that. Like, show me the money, show me the data, show me the policy. But yes, Diana, you can get the draft documents and you should request those beforehand so you can come to the table being prepared of what's in those documents for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this information. It's really helpful.
You're so welcome. I also wanted to just put down here too, if you review your child's options and choose not to participate in preschool special education, you can request that at a later time. So what that means, so again, I'm going to go back. I like to tell stories when I do this because I just feel like it makes it a little more, I don't know, better than just clinical, I guess. The meeting that I was in last week, the parents are choosing to keep their child in their ABA therapy group for the 5 days a week until he goes to kindergarten. So they have decided not to proceed with their IEP, right? I mean, they signed the document saying that yes, he does qualify, but they are declining preschool services right now. He will start with his IEP in August. So you don't have to say yes to his IEP, right? Or I say his, but his or hers immediately. You can kind of push that off and then start it when they're going into kindergarten. Questions about that? We good? All right, I'm gonna move on. But again, if you have questions, either unmute or you can put it in the chat. So let's go back and talk a little about parent input statements. And some of you might have seen, if you like are on social media or anything, you might have seen those like about me, like tell me about your child kind of documents, which I have a free download later on and I'll put it up there. But this is different than a about me document. What it does, and again, the key words that you need to know as parents is why you request those documents ahead of time is so that you can have meaningful input into the meeting. So again, your procedural safeguards will talk about having meaningful input, and that's keywords in there. So Diana, and I'm just referring to you because you asked about it, you can say I'm respectfully requesting the draft documents to be sent home to me 3 days before the meeting so I can have meaningful input at our meeting.
You got it. Okay.
Yep. And you are an equal team member, so your input is valuable. So why send a parent input statement? It's your chance to be the expert. Now, if you've never been in an eligibility meeting before, you've never been in an IEP meeting, they can be overwhelming. And I'm sure that Jess can attest to this, that they can be overwhelming. You have maybe a principal at the meeting, you have teachers, you have lots of people at the meeting. And if you bring somebody like myself, then there's way more people at the meeting and you probably are like, intimidation, what do I do? You get to be the expert. Parent input statements allow you to be the expert. You know your child. Shonda knows what her child, I'm just calling you out because I can see your face. I love it. Shonda knows her child. She knows what he or she does on a daily basis. What's the triggers? What's the good things that he does or she does every day? Shonda, do you have a son or a daughter?
Neither. I work for early autumn services.
Oh, dang it. Okay. Well, then I'm going to go with Jess then, because I know you have a son. Jess goes and she's like, I know what he likes and what he doesn't like and what his interests are. I know what he has as goals. I have all these goals for him. You are the expert and your information is super important and valuable. You have insight into your child that no one else does. You have seen them from birth until now, 3, 4, 5 years old. You've seen the struggles that they have. They maybe didn't communicate until they were 3 years old. That's super important information. Maybe you're super excited that they said hello to somebody that they don't typically say hello to. You are an equal member of the team, and this is your opportunity to put your information in writing, and it should be copied and pasted directly into the reports. Please don't ask them. I see it all the time that schools will paraphrase information that parents send. Well, what happens with paraphrasing? It gets lost in translation, misinterpreted. If it's copied and pasted, then there's no lack of transparency. There's no misinformation, and it can be explained at the meeting. It does also help guide the conversation during the meeting. So I always say that it's about the whole child. So it could be inclusive of goals that you have for your child, whether that's, and not academic, maybe you have a goal that they attend a birthday party. That's super important. Maybe your child has never gotten invited to a birthday party. Maybe they need some more social skills in order to get to that birthday party. You can include that in that parent input statement and then ask the team, how can we build some social stories, or how can we build some social interactions, or could we get some pragmatic language from the speech pathologist to help with that social interaction so my child can build those friendships and be included in that birthday party. I hear it all the time. Even my older students that I support, they haven't been invited to a birthday party, or we never get invited to play dates. Well, that makes me really sad for families, it really does. So that can be included in this. It also is important, and you should be including information from your private service providers. That could be that Graham has been working with your child's RBT, and you want to ask Graham for some information about your child that can be submitted in there. She's been working with your child. She knows. What have they been working in private speech or OT or, feeding therapy? That's super important, and that can be included in that parent input statement. Like for even Diane, who has a meeting on Friday, you can say, why have you been pushing for this? What deficits do you see? Because there are things that you might see at home that the school doesn't see. Specifically anxiety-driven goals, or diagnoses that aren't necessarily seen. They hold it together, they mask at school or mask in these other places, and then they come home and it's complete meltdown. That's important for the team to know, and that can be included in parent input. So when do you send a parent input statement? I suggest at minimum at the annual review IEP. At minimum. Now, if you have an amendment, like I said, you can ask for an IEP multiple times during the year. Maybe they are looking at goals and objectives. If nothing really has changed in the terms of maybe you have the same goals for the child throughout the year, then I probably wouldn't send it, but at least update it annually. And you probably won't even realize how much your child has changed until you sit down and write a statement about where they are, what you see them doing, the friendships they've made, short-term goals, long-term goals. And I mean, it's important. It's like, oh, I can reflect on that. Ideally, you should send it with the signed notice of meeting. And please keep in mind that whether you're going to an eligibility meeting or you're going to an IEP meeting, you should be receiving a copy of your parental rights, procedural safeguards, and that's not just Georgia, that's all over the country. You should also be receiving what they call parent notice of meeting, and that tells you who's attending the meeting and what their role is at the table. So I might be coming to the meeting as a special ed teacher, so it would say Heather Wright, special ed teacher, Jess Goldberg, gen ed teacher, Graham Green, LEA, Shonda Smith, principal. You have a right to know who's coming to the meeting and make sure that they are there. So make sure you get the parent notice of meeting and the procedural safeguards before the meeting. When you sign the notice of meeting that you're attending, then you can send the parent notice or parent input statement. That's typically, I say, about a week before, because again, like I said, nobody likes surprises. So if you had questions for the team, maybe you wanted to know about those pragmatic deficits, or you had questions about how transitions from the classroom maybe to art, maybe to the bathroom, what does that look like? Or what are the procedures for behavior? When do parents get called home? Can I volunteer? Ask those questions ahead of time so that when you come to the meeting, you can have really good conversations and you don't have to get put on hold, as I say, and say, oh, I got to find out. And then if somebody forgets to come back to it later on. So at least a week before, at most, probably 2 weeks, because I know myself, if I get something 2 weeks before, 3 weeks before, I might forget about it. So you don't want to forget about it and get lost. So a week before. I always ask families to email it because then they can copy and paste it directly from the email into the IEP or the eligibility documents. And for Diana, who has a meeting, if you wanted to submit something, I've given example statement that you can include when you're sending it off to parents. We're looking forward to our upcoming meeting. We have attached our parent input statement that we would like added to the parent concern section and discussed at the meeting. It doesn't have to be anything more than that. It can be very general, but it gets the point across that you want it put in the IEP. Questions? Hands raised, no hands raised?
Heather,
Yes.
I just wanted to kind of just, again, with this personal, I just wish I knew you 15 years ago. If any of us have been in an IEP meeting, it's so overwhelming. It's so emotional. It's intimidating because usually there's lots of people from the school around. And then we're talking about our child, our heart outside of our bodies, deficits. So what I love about this is it gets you organized before, and it also anchors you in the meeting. So I'm just so grateful that you put this together. And again, I wish I had it way back when, because I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, like, what's your parent input? And I'm like a deer in headlights. Like, and so this really, having this in front of you helps anchor your thoughts, and you're going to be asked in the meeting for, what you want to include anyway. So being able to put some thought in it prior is just gold. So thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. And it's super important too, for me to let you know too, that it doesn't have to be, you don't need to share all of the deficits that your child has. This is not for you to do that per se. Yes, you can acknowledge that there are deficits. Like, my child has a hard time communicating with peers. Put that in there, but really focus on all the positives. If you know that your child works for tangible items and reward systems, put that in there. Just put it in there. Like, if they love gummy bears and they work for gummy bears, put that in there. If they could care less about tangible items, then the team needs to come to the table with some outside the box options. It doesn't need to be food related, even though that's the easiest thing for families to do, or for teachers to do. And I was guilty of it myself as a middle school teacher. The kids are like, give me the gum and give me the chocolate. And I was like, are you paying for it? Because it's expensive. But include some of those positive things about your child. You know your child best, and it doesn't need to just focus on all the negatives. Yes, the IEP is going to focus on what your child struggles with so that they can put goals and objectives and work on those skills. But I love to work on the positives to strengthen those needs. So see if we can incorporate the positives, even on a reward chart. So if your child loves Minecraft, make the reward chart on Minecraft. Make it on Spider-Man, Pokemon, unicorns, whatever you do. Like, I had a kid that loved a rapper, and again, I taught middle school, so probably not appropriate for a 3-year-old, but for a middle school kid, he loved rappers, like hip hop musicians, and we included his reward system with hip hop musicians. I also had kids that loved anime, and they loved they were into the water bottles at that point, like where you stick the stickers on the water bottles. That was a reward system for me, and I just found what my kids loved. So include some of that, like include all the positives and not just the negatives or the needs of your child. Because again, if this is your first time and experience at an IEP table or in an eligibility meeting, the school team doesn't know your child at this point. You know your child best. You can be the expert. Tell them the things that aren't necessarily seeing. Like, my mom could have come to a table and said, if Heather's picking her nails, her anxiety's high. Like, that's important for somebody to know. Don't look at my nails now, because they get a little bit, they're a little torn up. But I'm glad that you mentioned that, just because it does get overwhelming for families. It does get emotional. And the family that I worked with the other day, they did submit their parent input statement, and they had one printed, and they just went through and kind of like checklisted all the questions that they had to make sure that all of their questions were answered. And of course, I was there to make sure that that was there, but I helped them with that. And it was awesome. They thanked me after. They were like, I didn't even know we could do this. So I wanted to give you some other tips and things that maybe you just don't know moving forward. If English is not your first language, you can get your documents translated for you. So parental rights come in Korean, German, Spanish, Portuguese, French. You can get those translated. And again, it's at no cost to you. You just need to make sure that you're asking for those documents ahead of time. You can also get the IEP also translated for you into your first language. So again, it's just requesting that ahead of time from the team, so they acknowledge that that's what's going to happen. Again, it's at no cost to you. You can also invite a translator to the meeting. Like, you can ask the school team to bring or to schedule a translator to come to the meeting with you. Years and years ago, I had a family that that was from India, and they spoke amazing English, but again, there's so much stuff in an IEP and an eligibility report that they were like, I want to make sure that I'm understanding. So we made sure that there was an interpreter that could understand and translate in their own native language. So you can ask for that service, again, free of charge. You are allowed to bring anyone to a meeting. A friend, family member, private therapist, a consultant like myself. The only thing that we ask is best practice is to let the people know ahead of time. The only thing that does change is if you choose to bring a lawyer to a meeting, and you have the right to do so, you have to let the school team know ahead of time, because they have to have lawyer representation there as well. Just putting it out there. This is a big thing too. If you're going to a meeting, any IEP meeting, any eligibility meetings, you do not have to sign the document the day of the meeting. You can have time to process the information. Now keep in mind that if it is your initial IEP meeting, so Diana, and I'm only referring to you just because you had mentioned that you had a meeting coming up. If your child is found eligible for special education and then moves to an IEP, in order for services to be delivered to your child, you do have to sign an initial consent for placement that says, yes, you're saying yes, that we can serve your child. But you don't have to necessarily sign that the day of the meeting. The meeting the other day that I had with a family, they said, we would love to sign this, but we want to process it all. And the school district said, sure. If you can have that to us by Friday, that would be lovely. And the meeting was on Tuesday. So Tuesday to Friday, and it worked out. They signed it, everything else, but you don't have to feel pressured to sign documents the day of the meeting. You can say, I want to have time to process it. You can even say, even if you don't have a coach in your pocket, I want my IEP coach to look at it beforehand. And then you can put it on me that I was the one that said you can't have to sign it. So it takes some of that pressure off of you. And then again, the last one, ask for the policy. If you hear something like, well, we don't do that here, or that needs to be done, ask for the policy, show me the policy. And then the biggest thing too that families don't know is that there's a section in the IEP, once your child is found eligible, called supports for school personnel. It's in the accommodation section of the IEP. That section is where you can get training for the staff that are going to be working with your child. And it can also be training for you as a parent. So I had a client that wanted a specific reading program with their child. And I think it was called the Wilson Reading Program. And the parent was like, I don't necessarily know what this looks like. And the child was doing it in class. She's like, can I, sit down with somebody? And the school put it in there. They got training on the Wilson Reading Program free of charge. If there's an AAC device, if there's a behavior plan. I've also seen it done with like therapists and things like that. So private therapists can, like, again, not necessarily when school is in session, but like, this is how we work on this and do the training. So you as a mom and you as a dad can be trained on the same things and tools and interventions that your children are doing in school. And the people that are working with your child also have that training. That's also behavioral plans. It could be health plans. I had a student that had severe, had seizures. So we had to have a seizure plan to make sure that we were able to help support her if that was the case. We had severe allergies. I had to know how to use an EpiPen. It was written in the plan in her IEP that all school staff was trained on how to use EpiPens. And we had the school nurse come and do the trainings. So you can ask for that as well. Questions? I had a couple other ones, but I don't remember. I'll think about it, I guess. Questions? What do you got? Bring them to me. Bring them on. Don't be shy.
Well, I'm going to ask another question. It's Diana again. On the first meeting that I requested to have for the IEP, one of the things that I noticed was that they did not notify his father of my child. And when I brought it up, I was like, why isn't he here? Did you guys send him the invitation? They're like, oh, no, we forgot. Is that something to be concerned as well? Or is that my responsibility to send him the information?
I'm going to assume that you and your husband are divorced.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So that it's not necessarily that's if you have educational rights, then it would be you as the mom having to share that with your ex-husband. However, you can also, and I've done it before in IEPs, that you can request that the school team include both you and your ex-husband on those communications so that you don't have to be the middleman. You can ask them to have them sent both,
Okay.
but only they don't have to have both parents there to move forward with the meetings unless your divorce decree says something about that in there, and then that gets a little wonky. But if you have educational right making decision, then they don't have to include the other parent, but you can
Got
request
it.
that they do so.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. All right. Do you guys like freebies? I like freebies. I like stuff that's free. So if you want some freebies, now if you go to my website does have a freebie on there, and it's middle school specific, but I wanted to create a couple for you guys being very new to this process of special education. So if you scan the QR code, it will pull up a Google form where I ask for your email address, and I will send you personally my IEP meeting checklist and an editable version of this About Me document. So for new parents going into it, new kindergartners, new preschools, I'm even sure like probably Jess or even Graham would love to have this information for your babies coming into ABA therapy. Like, give me a picture, give me a vision statement of what your goals are for your child. What are their strengths and struggles? I'll send these to you if you follow my link, please. Because if I send in my website, it's only middle school, and I don't think you want middle school stuff right now. So I'll leave that up for you all. It'll be good. And oh, by the way, Jess will, I will send this to you guys in a PDF, Jess, and then you guys can have, if you want to send it out to the participants, whether they've been here or if they've signed up, then they can get a copy of it as well. So if you've missed it, look out for that email from Jess.
I'll be happy to send that. We'll have a recording, a link to this recording in case you want to reference anything we talked about today. And like I said earlier, you know, we do have Graham and now Shonda Smith on the call. Although Graham is the clinical director here in Georgia, I know many of you are around the country, and you know, if you have any questions about ABA or about any of our services, just let us know. And if she can't answer it, we'll make sure we find someone who can soon, but I have a feeling she'll be able to address anything you need to know.
I did have a couple. I wanted to come back to this slide for just a few minutes. Please keep in mind that you can make sure, like I said in the beginning, you can ask for the raw data samples on your child's goals and objectives. So that's not just the worksheets that they've done in math class or in science class for the week, but when you develop a child's IEP, there will be goals and objectives that are developed. You can ask for the raw data samples. So show me the data specifically to speech goals and objectives. Show me the data on how they're doing on their reading comprehension questions. You can ask for that. Also, it's super important, and I did this with a family on Friday. Again, the child is in pre-K. He's going to be going, this is a different child than I spoke about. He's going to be transitioning to kindergarten and struggles with transitions, just in general transitions. So we developed at the IEP meeting transition activities to support this child transitioning from pre-K to kindergarten. So social stories, class tours, school tours. We also put into play like showing a map, because he's good with visuals. So we made a map of like where he would need to go, like for the bathroom, where his art class was, even as things as like you go from preschool, which is a different environment than kindergarten, and you're not even sure, like you have to eat in this cafeteria with all these kids. You can develop some of those transition skills. Riding a bus, you can develop those before the kid gets to the next level. You have that discussion inside that IEP meeting and develop those transition activities to help your child progress in that. And that can also be shared with private therapists. So they did it with, they brought some of that back to their ABA therapist so they could work on like social stories and pictures of like, this is going to be your teacher, this is your classroom, this is your cubby, this is how we stand in a hallway. So it's just make sure that you guys know that that you can support your child. It's not just for an IEP is not just for academics. It can be for behavior. It can also support transitioning in and out of different programs. That was a lot of information. So now I'll plug myself a little bit here, but like I told Jess, I'm not a salesperson. So I laughed and told her that even if my house was burning on fire and the policemen and the firefighters were there, I couldn't sell them a ladder. Like I just can't do it. It just doesn't do work wonders for me. But I do offer a free 30-minute consultation. There's no obligation. But if you do have more questions or you're like, Heather, I think I do need support, whether it's at an IEP meeting or at an eligibility meeting, or you just want behind the scenes kind of help, like, let me help you before we get to a meeting. I can help with those parent input statements. Schedule that free consult and I'll, see what your concerns are and how I can work with you. And we can get that scheduled. I know some of you had already put down that you would like to have a consultation with me. So if I haven't reached out to you, I know I did for a couple of families, you can either go to the QR code and fill out the link for me, or if I haven't heard from you by Friday, then I'll reach out to you and get that phone consultation scheduled for you. What do you guys have? Questions? Anything? I'm trying to watch the time and be cognizant of the time. We're almost at 7, but I'm here. What do you need? I am on social media. I do have a pretty good following on Instagram. I put lots of tips and tricks out there. My reel from yesterday had a lot of hype because parents weren't getting excusal letters for required members at IEP team meetings or any eligibility meetings. And they were like, wait, I didn't know that there were required members. There are. And if those required members aren't in attendance, then they should be notifying you ahead of time that they're not going to be in attendance. And you have the right to reschedule that meeting if they're not going to be there. You have to give permission if they're required. But you can follow me on social media if you'd like to get some of those tips and tricks. What else? That's all I got, Jess.
Okay, well, thank you, Heather. And yes, Heather is a blast to follow on social media, and I've always learned lots of great tips. Thank you so much for this. It was just wonderful to learn from you tonight.
Well, you're welcome. And yes, I love it. Again, like I said, I was a former special education teacher, and my passion is truly to educate moms and dads and families about the process. And I get this question a lot. When should somebody reach out to somebody like me? Anytime. It doesn't have to be when you're fighting. It could be when you're brand new, because you just don't know what you're allowed to ask for, what should be happening, who should be at the meeting. Is this a regular process? Is this how it should go? You don't have to wait until things get hairy to reach out to somebody like myself. But I would suggest that whether you go with somebody like me or you go with a different advocate, do some consultations and do some research, because not all advocates, consultants are created equal. So it's not all of us come to the table wanting to collaborate, or sometimes personalities match and mismatch, and we just got to make sure that we fit. So either reach out to me or somebody else, but just do your research and make sure that it's a right fit for you and your family before you go with somebody. All right. Well, Jess, I truly appreciate you having me on, and for Graham and Shonda, and for Diana and Amber. And I can't see anybody else on my screen. Oh, there we are. Heather, Demetrius, Carla. Thank you guys for joining. And I hope you gathered some information and took a takeaway from anything that I shared about today. And like I said, Jess, I will send you the PDF of the presentation. And then if you can send it out to the families that have registered, so they have this.
Absolutely. And I think many of you all here today are EASE Early Autism Services families. If you're not, and you have any questions about ABA or our services or our school readiness programs, you can let me know when I email you. Go to our website, earlyautismservices.com, or email info@earlyautismservices.com. But thank you everyone for your time tonight. It was really great spending some time with you all.
You're so welcome. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Have a good night.
Okay, bye everybody.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
You too.